I'm here tonight live at PhillyCAM, coming at you on Facebook Live. So we're going to be going over everything you need to know about the census and how to be a census champion. And really what that means is how to be a trusted resource in your community to make sure that you're giving out right information and positive information and clear information all about the census because it's coming up and we want to make sure that everybody in Philly is counted. So we're going to start the presentation. I have a PowerPoint behind me that I'll flip through. Like I said, I'm in PhillyCAM and we're Facebook Living this. So if you have a question, we have people standing by that can read your questions off the computer. And then my friend Donald, who's in the studio here, is going to be reading them for me. And we have some guests in the audience as well that might shout a few questions out as we go. So the idea is to have this more of like a virtual dialogue. So if you have questions, ask them at any times, and then I'll also reserve some space at the end. I'll share my contact information and PhillyCAM's contact information as well, so we can make sure that everyone has the right information in front of them. All right, so first we're going to start with, who is a census champion and why are they important? So a census champion is a trusted messenger who has the knowledge to educate their community about the census and the impact in their city. So I mentioned that a little bit when I started. One thing I do want to say is that I am going to be reading from this like incredible binder that I have here that's full of information because I want to make sure that I'm giving the right and correct and clear information out. So if you see me looking down, that's what I'm looking at now. So as you may know, today is Constitution Day, and the city of Philadelphia is marking the occasion with over 50 of these census events across the city. So hopefully over hundreds and hundreds of people are being trained, and I hope you're excited as I am to take part in this historic program. So to kick us off, we're going to have a video from Mayor Kenny. He helped create the initiative Philly Counts, and he's super passionate about this initiative, and so we're just hear a few words from him. And here we go. This is live TV, so bear with us.
Hi, I'm Mayor Jim Kenny, and I'm excited to welcome you to your Census Champion Training. This is an historic moment, and we're glad you want to be part of it. So much is at stake for our city in this upcoming census. Today you'll learn why the census matters and the important role that you will play. First off, our goal to have a complete and accurate count of our city. Our first step towards that goal is to recruit community members like yourself to become census champions, who will talk to their friends and neighbors about the census. With all the misinformation out there, we need trusted messengers like you in every corner of our city. So let's begin.
Okay, great. So round of virtual applause for Mayor Kenny. We're very excited to have him kick us off tonight. If you are live streaming at home and you're watching this, I'd love to know why you're interested in learning more about the census. For me, I'm concerned about the census. I'm worried that Philly won't be fully counted, and so I felt like it's part of my civic duty to participate and volunteer with Philly Counts. But I know that there's a lot of different reasons why people want to know this information and share it with their community. So if you are streaming at home and want to type something in, please do so. In addition to that, there's lots of opportunities to share this information on social media. You can use the Twitter handles at US Census Bureau, at Philadelphia.gov, and then always use the hashtag PhillyCounts. We are streaming this on Facebook, but if you want to share that link on your own account on Twitter too, so we have more viewers, that would be great. I think too, if you have a question that I can't answer tonight, because you might ask something, and if I don't know the answer, I don't want to give you the wrong information, so I might just say I don't know. You can get a pretty quick response, I think, by tweeting that information out. And then we'll go over lots of other ways of how you can ask questions after the presentation too. So if there's something I can't answer, it's totally okay. We want to make sure we get you the most accurate information. So tweeting at the US Census Bureau is one way to do that. Okay, so we are ready to get started. And we're going to do an overview of what we're going to learn today. So we're going to do the Census 101, data security, privacy, and confidentiality, very important. How everybody gets counted, so a little bit of behind the scenes and how the census data works. Digital literacy, we'll talk about the importance of that for this year in particular. How to get involved, we've already taken the first step, and then we'll talk about keys to success that we collectively as a community can take to make sure that everybody's counted. So let's get started with section 1, Census 101. What do you need to know? So what do you guys think, and again, I'm talking to the Facebook audience that may or may not be there. What do you guys think the census is? You hear the word census, it's obviously something very important, otherwise we wouldn't be here tonight. But there's a lot of different, I think, definitions and ideals and perceptions of it. So the definition is the United States Census is a national survey conducted every 10 years by the U.S. Census Bureau to count the population and to gather information about how the country is changing. So censuses have been conducted by countries all throughout the world since the 16th century. They've been part of our country's history since 1790, and this year is going to mark our 24th census. I don't know about anyone else, but I remember doing the census 10 years ago and getting that like giant phone book package in the mail. I was the responsible roommate, so I filled it out for my household at the time. But in 2020, it's completely changed. We're gonna do a short form questionnaire with just 9 questions. So that's a real game changer as far as making sure that everybody has the time and accessibility to be counted. I wanna take a moment to clarify that the U.S. Census Bureau, they're the ones that execute the census. So I'm here tonight as a volunteer with PhillyCAM, but really the Census Bureau, they're responsible for hiring the enumerators, also known as the counters. They print the forms, they collect the data. We're not in charge of any of that. We're really held responsible for supporting the Census Bureau in this work to make sure that Philly is counted accurately. So we're helping promote it, we're marketing the census, we're working with different communities to make sure that people have resources they need and that the census is accessible. And so I just wanted to differentiate those two. So you should also know that completing the census is required by law. We can get into why the census is important. It's much more than just a head count. It's actually responsible for the impact on Philadelphia for the next 10 years. So census data is determined to use representation in Congress. And there we go. It's representation in Congress. Donald's on it for me, off to the side there. Thank you, Donald. The disbursement of federal funds and is used for research, both publicly and privately. So there's a lot of things that the census data is reliant on. And that is why it's so important. You're gonna hear me say this 20 times within this presentation, if not more, that we do not wanna have an undercount. So an undercount is when fewer than the actual numbers. Oh, we're going back to the video. So the undercount, I'll just let that happen behind me. So the undercount is when fewer than actual number of people are recorded in the census. An undercount means federal programs and representations are allocated for a smaller number of people that live in our city. So in order for us to get funding and resources and services for our citizens and for our residents, we need to make sure that we have an accurate number of how many people need to be served. And there's so many ways that an undercount can affect different programs. Medical assistance programs, Medicare Part B, SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, school lunch programs. I mean, you hear in the news about kids that have school lunch debt. School lunch programs on a federal level can resolve that. Special education grants, the highways. So here in Philly, 76, 95, 476, 676 will all be affected by the number of estimated users of those highways. Section 8 housing, federal grants, AmeriCorps Vista, community block grants, foster care. I mean, there's a number of things. The list goes on and on. So we really want to make sure that we're doing our best job to not be undercounted so we have an accurate number. The way I like to think about it is just say, as for example, if the sidewalks were funded by the census, you need to know if you have 500 or 1,000 or 1,500 people using those sidewalks so you can estimate how much repairs you'll need, how much cleaning you'll need. So think about it in that way. So let's talk about all the ways the data census affects Philadelphia. So census data helps us see how the country is changing and how everyone uses it. Local governments, businesses, researchers, and nonprofits. So those are all major sectors that are, or buckets, I guess you could say, that are affected by the census. So I'm gonna walk through each one very briefly to give you an example of how it's affected. So if you start with Philadelphia, Philadelphia benefits when the census counts everybody, right? So thinking of the sidewalk example that I used, that's something to keep in mind. Federal programs disperse grants that support communities based on population totals and breakdowns by sex, age, and race. Residents use the census to support community initiatives involving legislation, quality of life, and consumer advocacy. Businesses use census data to decide where to open new stores, factories, offices, and then that in turn creates new jobs, right? Local government officials use the census to ensure public safety and plan new schools and hospitals. And then nonprofit organizations use census data to learn where and how to best serve their constituencies. So just reiterating the fact of how important the census is and how it affects so many different areas of our day-to-day. And if you're at home in front of your computer and want to share how the census and the programs we listed and the different sectors and buckets that it affects will change your day-to-day, it would be great to hear different ways that you at home would be affected by this data. And certainly understanding the significance of an undercount versus an accurate count. So that's like the big overview. The census day is April 1st. And there's a lot of stuff that's happening before that, and there's a lot of stuff that's happening afterwards. But when you hear about Census Day, you want to remember April 1st. This is not an April Fool's joke, I promise you, okay? I thought that was like a little confusing that was the day they picked, but it is what it is. It is a serious Census Day. So we'll look at the timeline. The U.S. Census Bureau will begin their outreach on March 12th, and they will finish in July 2020. This is what you'll receive in the mail. So remember, we're getting rid of that giant phone book package, and we're going totally new century here. So by April 1st, 2020, households will receive an invitation via U.S. mail to participate in the census. So the first thing you'll get in the mail is an invitation to participate. In 2020, for the first time in history, people can respond to the census online. That's going to be a major game changer, but it's also going to prevent some barriers and challenges too, and we'll get into all of that. People can also respond over the phone. So if you don't want to do it by mail, you don't want to do it online, you can do it by the phone. You can do a paper form and mail it in through the U.S. Postal Service, like traditionally, or you can do it in person with the census counter. Census takers or counters or enumerators, they'll visit households if you have not completed the census on any of the other ways. So if you haven't done it online, by mail, or by phone, their job is to help you complete the census. Okay, so let's talk about language access, right? Because that's incredibly important, of course, across the country, but especially here in Philadelphia. If you do not speak English, you can respond to the census online or by phone in 12 different languages: Spanish, Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, Russian, Arabic, Tagalog, Polish, French, Haitian Creole, Portuguese, and Japanese. So those are the 12 languages that you can respond to the census to online or by the phone. However, there will be language assistant cards available through the census takers or the census counters in up to about 59 different languages. So these cards, they will not be exact translations, but they'll be as instructions, translated instructions on how to fill out the form. And that's just like an incredible and impressive number. So I'm super excited about that. The paper form will be available in English and bilingual English-Spanish. Spanish-only forms will be available in Puerto Rico. It's also important to know that they'll have online and print versions for Braille, and then there'll be an online ASL, American Sign Language version for the video online too. So lots of different ways to access it. which is, like I said, it's incredibly exciting and inclusive. So we feel really good about that. So this is what you will receive in the mail, and this is the timeline. So you will receive, and this will kind of backtrack what we talked about a little bit. You'll receive an invitation or postcard in the mail. From March 12th to 20th, 2020, you'll receive via U.S. mail an invitation to complete the 2020 census online. That is the preferred way, and we'll talk about what that means and what that looks like. From March 16th to 24th, you will receive a reminder letter. And then from March 26th to April 3rd, you will receive an additional reminder letter if you haven't responded yet. If you have responded within a timely fashion, then you should be good to go. Okay. April 8th through 16th, you'll receive a reminder letter alongside a paper questionnaire. And then April 20th to 27th, you'll receive a reminder letter before a taker or a number counter comes for a visit. So if you don't want someone to come to your house, fill it out in these other ways. If you do, if you prefer that way and you want someone to help you, that seems to be about the time frame that they'll come by. After the 5th and final mailer, an enumerator will visit your residence to offer assistance. So that will have you covered there. So households will receive several reminders in many different formats in a short period of time. So you'll hopefully get like a very visual picture of the census, how to access it, and when it's due. All right, so let's take a look at what the actual form looks like. So here it is on the screen. Here it is. Here's another. I don't know if it's better to see it on the screen, or you can just see like a printout copy here. For those of you that are attending in person or have attended in person, this is in your folder. The 2020 census, as we mentioned, has only 9 questions, and it's going to collect basic information about your household and the people living in it. How many people are living in your house on April 1st? So again, going back to that April 1st date, why it's so important. When you fill out the census, you want to think about what your situation is, what your living situation is, where you're living, who's living with you on that exact date. So if you're moving on April 2nd, you want to think about where you are on April 1st. You'll be asked whether your home is owned or rented, and then you'll be asked about gender, race, age, ethnic group, and relationship. And everyone in your house will be asked these questions. So if you have 6 people in your house, this form will be filled out 6 different times, but together you'll have one submission as one household. The census asks for people's names only to ensure that each household member is counted only once. Names help census workers to remove extra records, so you don't want to be double counted. So that's why they are going to ask for your name on the census sheet. And answering all questions on average should take about 10 minutes, give or take, depending on how many people you have in your household. So that's the basics for what the census actually is and what the questions are. Do you have to answer all census questions? I mean, you should. We'd like you to. Everyone is encouraged to fill out the census completely. If you don't fill out all the questions, your form still will be valid, but it's possible that somebody will still come to your door in that later time frame to have you finish it. Because again, it is going to be really important that we have a complete count and all those areas are accurately filled out. So we really do encourage you, if you're already sitting down and you're going to fill out the first 3 questions, just finish it and complete the 9 if you can. And then this is a really important slide as well. So there's been a lot of conversation about, will there be a citizenship question on the census? The answer is no. So you will not be asked your citizenship status. I think that's an important message to get spread out, because people hear, over the summer there was a lawsuit and people may not know where that landed. We want to make sure that this is a comfortable and trusting process. So make sure that this message gets spread. There will not be a citizenship status question on the census. So that's it. That's not it actually, but that's it for this section, I should say. So Census Day is April 1st. It takes about 10 minutes to fill out the form, and an undercount is when fewer than the actual number of people are counted. And so that's what we want to avoid. We want to avoid an undercount, and that's why census champions, like all of you, are so important. So we're gonna kind of move, oh, I didn't realize that was an animation. So there you go, you already knew the answer. All right, so section 2, data security, privacy, and confidentiality. This is another incredibly important part of sharing information about the census because you want to make sure that it's a trustful and comfortable situation. It is understandable that some people feel weary about giving out their family's personal information to anyone, right? Whether it be the census or credit cards or people over the phone, including the federal government, right? So that's a very real and understandable hesitation. However, you should know that the data collected by the U.S. Census Bureau it's confidential, it's secure, and it is protected by the U.S. Constitution. And I'll be very specific about this. So Title 13, which is the same law that requires you to fill out the census, also protects your data. The data collected by the census has to remain anonymous, and it's used for statistical purposes only. So unlike law and order, this information cannot be used against you in a court of law. And there you have a picture of law and order up there. So there you go. How does the U.S. Census Bureau use the data collected? I think this is a big misconception too, right? So the government's collecting all this data. What do they actually do with it, right? It's used only for statistical purposes. Group household responses are used to paint a picture of the community demographics. They want to know where people are, what type of people are there, what type of services could they possibly use and benefit from. As mentioned, the census data is protected, again, by Title 13. That's important to remind people. It cannot be used against any person by any government agency or court. No one can access individual responses. And I'm going to repeat that. No one can access individual responses. It's incredibly important. No law enforcement agencies can access this information. So DHS, ICE, FBI, CIA, no one can access this. And I think that's another important message to put through so people do feel safe and comfortable and we make sure that everybody's counted. Yeah, go ahead.
I think that was a concern because I remember many years ago when I was younger that we wouldn't answer this census because we didn't know how important it was.
Yes.
We thought that the government was trying to get into our business and it would be something negative against us.
No.
We didn't know that was actually something positive for our community.
Yeah, and so that's why organizations like PhillyCAM and volunteers across the city, that's why we're making such a big deal about this right now because there is that misconception and there is that mistrust. I think I forget what the exact statistic is, but distrust in the government is at its highest right now. And so we want to make sure that we're changing that narrative and we're making people see the benefits because we really do need to have everybody counted. So yeah, so that's great that you're here tonight and can kind of bring this information back to your friends and neighbors. Yeah. So I will share that while the information is protected, I want to be clear and transparent. The U.S. Census Bureau is required to keep your information confidential for 72 years. It can't release identifiable information to any individual, but it does have that 72-year mark, right? But when it is released, it's released to the National Archives and Records for Administration. And an example of the time frame of when you fill out the census to when this information could be released. In 1940, the 1940 census was just released in 2012. The 1950 census will be released in 2022. So there is that big time frame, and the information that you're collecting, you're not putting your social security number on it. It is more about demographics and who you are and who you're representing in your community. But I just wanted to make that point. So do you know who has access to the census data? So the U.S. Census Bureau, they manage all of the data. But even so, the U.S. Census Bureau employees, they take a lifetime oath of non-disclosure that protects your answers because they have to remain confidential. Punishment for mishandling data is up to $250,000 in a fine and up to 5 years in federal prison. So they put forth pretty serious consequences for the people that are physically handling the data and aggregating it. The U.S. Census Bureau will produce a summary report which presents an analysis of the data collected in the 2020 census. Individual households will not be identified based on the responses. Again, this is all aggregating and collecting information and analyzing it in an anonymous way. So that's important to know, and these talking points will come up as you're going out into your communities and into your neighborhoods. So this stuff is important to have these talking points as these questions arise. So let's talk about the Census Bureau enumerators, also known as the counters. The counters will have badges and briefcases indicating their affiliation with the Census Bureau. So right off the bat, if someone knocks on your door, if you see someone walking down the street and they're talking about the census, you want to see if they have a badge and if they have a briefcase with the logo on it. Employees will introduce themselves as Census Bureau employees. They'll show their official government ID badge, and they'll explain the purpose of the visit. You can ask for a picture ID from them to identify their tag versus their ID, so you have a permission to do that. And the U.S. Census Bureau will never ask you to step out of your home. So that's important to note too. But there's another protection in place, which I think is really great. If you feel weary that an enumerator at your door is maybe not who they say they are, you can use this tool to verify the identity of the U.S. Census Bureau. So if you have access to the internet at home on a smartphone, you can go to this website, you can type in the person's name, and they will tell you if they are indeed a fact a counter. If you don't have access to the internet at that moment, you can call 311 as well, and they'll be able to do this for you. So let's talk about scams, right? Because I think that's another fear that people have. It's not just trusting the government collecting this information, but it's really trusting the people that are going around and taking it. So the U.S. Census Bureau will never ask for your social security number. They'll never ask for money. They'll never ask for donations, and never about financial information, so bank or credit card numbers. The U.S. Census Bureau will never send an invitation to complete the census via email. So we talk about, the census is going to be online for the first time, and this is so exciting. You'll never be emailed a link to take that census. That's where the postcard and the invitation in the mail comes in. So if you get an email with a link to a census questionnaire, it's most likely a scam. If you suspect a scam or phishing, as it's called, you have to report it. We ask you to report it. If you see something, say something. So if something looks suspicious or your gut's telling you don't feel comfortable filling it out, report it and get it on record. There's a bunch of numbers here. I'll read out loud the 1-800 number, but there's others too if you can see the slides on the screen. 1-800-262-4236. You can also send an email to philadelphia.regional.office@census.gov. You can also call 311. They're going to be a really great partner in doing this work. And then before, when we talked about social media, if you're active online and you want to tweet at the U.S. Census Bureau and Philly Counts, you can do that as well. Yeah.
Lately, there have been people calling. I know I've got several calls saying that they were calling from the Social Security Administration, and I found out that they don't do that. Now, will there ever be a chance that someone from the census will call someone?
I am not 100% sure. I don't think so, but I don't want to go on record saying that that's a definite answer.
Somebody may say, I'm from the Census Bureau. And
yes, 100%. So none of my materials say that somebody will reach out via phone, but let's find that out for you before we leave here today. Okay. All right. So if anyone's online watching this and wants to tweet at the U.S. Census Bureau, ask that question. The question was, will somebody from the Census Bureau call you to get you to fill out the form rather than you calling them to fill out the form? So we'll get you an answer to that either way. But that was a great question. All right, so that wraps section 2. Remember, we have 6 of these, so we're trying to move along here. Section 3 is how everybody gets counted. So how does it work, right? Counting everyone in the country on a specific date is like a very big job, right? It's a logistical feat. We want to make sure that we do it right. That's why we're starting now in September, getting ready for Census Day in April 1st. As we discussed in Section 1, most people will receive an invitation to participate in the census at their home, whether they're rented, owned, or it's temporary housing. Not everyone in this country is in this type of living situation, right? So we want to talk about different ways that folks who are experiencing different living situations can be counted in the most effective way possible. So there's a significant amount of people that aren't living in traditional housing units, right? So this is the breakdown of how the census is going to look at what they're calling group quarters. There's institutional, there's correctional facilities, nursing homes, and mental hospitals. And then there's non-institutional, so college dormitories, military barracks, group homes, and missions or shelters. So we want to make sure that everybody's getting counted because these are non-traditional, or I guess that's not non-traditional, but they're different than the, than if you own or rent a home. We're going to be starting in February 2020. So we're starting even earlier to make sure that everybody's counted. And so I'm going to break down how each of these groups are going to be counted and what the strategy is. So the goal of the Census Bureau is to take a snapshot of where people are living on April 1st, 2020. So if you have a college student if you have a college student living on campus, they will be counted at their campus address, not at their home address. So if they live in Philly and they go to Temple, they'll be counted where they're living at Temple. If they live in Philly but they go to school outside of the city or the state, they'll be counted where they go to school. Philadelphia has over 18 colleges and universities in our city. The students living at Penn, Drexel, Temple, they all use our public services, right? Because they're residents here, they live here. They're riding SEPTA, they're going to the libraries, they're buying groceries, they're using our roads and our sidewalks. So we want to make sure that we include them as users of Philadelphia, and that's why we want to count them in Philadelphia, okay? Okay, so this is another group that I think is important to talk about. If someone is incarcerated, where and how are they counted? And now I'm going to share this information, and I just want to, it's not about, I'd love to have another dialogue about the logistics of this and what's, what's fair and what's not, but I'm just going to state the facts as they are. So following the same logic, as we talked about with college, if someone is incarcerated on April 1st, 2020, they will be counted through group quarters at the facility they are in on Census Day. So wherever they are incarcerated, that is where they will count, and that is where the census will identify their demographic as individuals. So that's important to know too. And then we could talk about babies, right? So babies are one of the groups most likely not to be counted. So it's important that we get all the babies counted as well. Be sure to include any newborns living in your home, even if they are still in the hospital on April 1st. They will be utilizing public services for the next 10 years, right? If there's split custody, you have to figure out where the baby will be on April 1st or which caretaker will record the child on their census data. So that's something to keep in mind. And then we want to talk about should you respond to the census if you're not an American citizen, right? So we talked about the citizen question being on there, but this is another big topic that should be discussed. So the U.S. Constitution mandates a count of all persons living in the country on a given date every 10 years. So it's not just citizens, right? The census counts all people. Citizens, non-citizen legal residents, non-citizen long-term visitors, and undocumented immigrants. So all those groups need to be accounted for in the census. If all of the undocumented immigrants living in Philadelphia, which is about 50,000 people, didn't participate in the upcoming census, we would lose out on $1 billion in federal funding over the next 10 years. So it's a significant impact. As we stated in Section 2, census data is secure and confidential, and it is protected by Title 13 in the Constitution, so it cannot be used, the census data cannot be used against you. And there are those rules and regulations, that Title 13 in place for that. So I think that's another important message to spread as well. Okay. Then we also want to talk about individuals experiencing homelessness. They are counted two ways. There's service-based enumeration, so counting. People experiencing homelessness can be counted at places where they receive services, so shelters, meal centers, places like that. And then there's transitory locations. So for those that don't have a stable home environment or are experiencing homelessness, they could be counted at one of these locations. So think hotels, motels, campgrounds, and they'll be using a paper form at those locations. So again, these are groups of individuals that we want to make sure are counted, and it's going to be it's a different approach. So we wanted to make sure that everybody has that information. So as you see, I mean, there's many challenges, right? It's hard. It's hard to do this work, and that's why we're starting today. We want to make sure that everybody is counted 100%. These challenges of different populations and how they'll be counted or not, they lead to certain communities being disproportionately underrepresented in the final count. And that's a huge loss. It's a loss of services, it's a loss of funding, and it's a loss of moving Philadelphia forward. So $21,000 is lost in funding per person that's not counted over 10 years. So think about the impact on our city if a family of 5 is left out of the census, right? The impact of the city if everyone in this room and watching at home, if they were not counted, if everyone on your block wasn't counted, your neighborhood would be left out. So it definitely adds up, and it adds up quickly, and that's why we really want to avoid an undercount. For every person left out of the census, the city is trying to stretch federal dollars to meet the needs and cover everyone who actually lives in the city and needs these services, so whether they're counted or not. So the city is going to serve people no matter what the final outcome is, but we want to make sure that we have enough funding, which will lead to enough resources to serve every individual the best that they can be served. So that's the big topic on who's being counted, how they're being counted, and who might be missed, and how do we avoid that. So now we're going to talk about digital literacy. I know you thought I was done, but I got more, so here we go. For the first time ever, the U.S. Census Bureau will offer online responses as their preferred method of self-response. While this is hugely convenient for some people, it poses an additional challenge for people in our city who don't have internet access, right? Or who aren't comfortable with technology too. I mean, you might be able to have access to all the electronics, but not feel comfortable navigating them. So there are other ways to participate in the census if you don't have a computer at home. And we're going to talk, about what that might look like. So as mentioned, internet response is the preferred method of self-response for the U.S. Census Bureau. Self-response meaning you're taking the initiative to fill out the census on your own. However, you can complete the census over phone or via paper form. You'll receive an invitation in the mail in March just to kind of review some of this information. And you can fill out the census online from any computer. PhillyCAM, the organization that's producing all these trainings around the city today, they're working with community organizations to open digital census centers. So if some of you remember, key spots and different computer labs throughout the city, it's going to be similar to that in March and April. So you'll have, plenty of time to have access to those public census centers. So stay tuned on that, and more information about where those centers will be and how to access them will be coming. If you don't have a computer, but you have a tablet or a smartphone, then you can complete the census form. So that's pretty straightforward. But of course, there's going to be hiccups, especially with a program as big as this. So if you're having trouble completing the census, do not give up, because we want to make sure you're counted. There are tons of resources to help you. And this just lists a bunch of them there, but for general help, the U.S. Census Bureau, for language barriers, there'll be those language cards and those language guides. They're not the census forms, but they're designed to help facilitate the forms, filling out the forms. There'll be guides available in ASL and large print as discussed, and then if all else fails, call our partners at 311 and they're gonna be able to help you out. So that I'm like so excited that 311's involved in this, because I think that's gonna be a really big game changer of how many people are counted. So we just breezed through that very quickly. And we're going to wrap up soon. So we sat through this incredibly dynamic and interesting presentation. So thank you for doing that. You've already gotten involved by coming here tonight or by tuning in on Facebook. So it's not about how to get involved, but how do you get more involved, and how do you keep the conversation going between now and April 1st when Census Day is. So let me just share, these are 4 ways that we're asking people to participate. The first is, if you are on social media and you are technically savvy, follow on Twitter at US Census Bureau and at Philadelphia Gov, and use the hashtag PhillyCounts. And that one's easy, and you can use that hashtag on any of the platforms, so Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever. Second, you want to encourage friends and family to become census champions just like you. So our program is launching today, but there's going to be trainings all throughout the city throughout the fall. We'll have additional trainings scheduled as early next week. So if you want to learn more, if you want to tell your friends and family that they should also become census champions too, there'll be lots of information out there about how to do that. So we're also going to be partnering with a company called FactSumo to bring this training online and onto your phone. So if you can't make it physically to a training, I don't know if it'll be as good as mine online training, but it might be. You can check out FactSumo. If you work for or are connected to a nonprofit organization in Philadelphia, this is a big one, especially being in PhillyCAM, because I think that they would be a great resource for this. There is a fund created by the city of Philadelphia in partnership with the Philanthropy Network that can give up to over $500,000 in funding available to nonprofit organizations that want to help promote the census. So if you're watching this at home and you work at a nonprofit or a community group, a CDC, a neighborhood advisory board, you want to check out the PhillyCounts 2020 Action Fund and see if you're eligible to receive funding. To date, over $60,000 has already been granted to Philadelphia-based organizations. And like I said, over $500,000 in funding is available. So there's a lot more to be spent. There is an incredibly long URL that I'll read, but I think it's also important to just, we'll get you the information if this is something you're interested in applying for. The URL is philanthropy-network.org/Philly-Counts-2020-action-fund. I feel like there should be funding to get a shorter URL in there. So finally, we invite you to attend our Action Leader Summit on November 9th. So this is like a big celebration, full day training to take your census championship level to the next level. You'll create an action plan on how to execute promoting the census, different ways to spread awareness, different initiatives you can take in your own neighborhood. So if you're the type of person, if you're a block captain, or if you are a go-to resource, if you're on a community advisory board, if you're the person that, like, when the lights go out on your street and everyone's convening on the road, you're the person that has to call PICO, like, you are a community leader, you're a community organizer, and you should be well equipped to talk about the census. So on November 9th, that's a great day to do that and to be with other census leaders. So that's a lot to follow up on, a lot of long URLs and dates to remember. If you want more information, we can figure out a way. I know you're streaming from home, but you can reach out to PhillyCounts. You can reach out to PhillyCAM and they can connect you. We'll make sure that you have the right information that you need. There's also opportunities for jobs with the U.S. Census Bureau too. I think that's also important to talk about. Again, this is not PhillyCAM that's doing the hiring, it is the U.S. Census Bureau, but they're great paying temporary jobs that serve a critical role in all of this work. You can make up to $21 an hour, and the hiring process is 100% internet based. People have to apply online, so that is something to consider, and figure out a way to make that, accessible for anyone in your community that is interested in applying that might not have that access. But to be eligible, you have to be 18 years or older, have a valid social security number, and be a U.S. citizen. Applicants who are bilingual are encouraged to apply for sure, because of all the different language access that will be available this year. And so to apply for a Census Bureau job, you want to go to 2020census.gov/jobs. So 2020census.gov/jobs. Census takers are assigned depending on where they're in the zip code that they live. So most likely you'll be within your own community, which is pretty great. Especially if you are that trusted resource, who better to be an enumerator and a counter than somebody that the community knows. So to find out more information about all of this, you want to contact Philly 311, visit our website, which is phila.gov/census, or you want to visit the U.S. Census Bureau at 2020census.gov. So that's how you stay involved. Again, reach out to PhillyCAM to make sure that you are bringing all of this knowledge and expertise into your community, to make sure that everybody feels confident and safe and secure and comfortable filling out the census. We really want to make sure that everybody is fully prepped. So I think that concludes most of the presentation. There's a couple of one-on-one exercises that you can do, and I think you'll get a sample of that if you do go to the summit on November 9th. But I'm going to say that concludes our presentation. Please make sure that you follow up with any of these resources. If you want to do another training or invite your friends and family to a training, if you want to apply for a Census Bureau job, or if you have any questions or hesitations that maybe someone's raised that you want to make sure you have an accurate answer to. So that's going to conclude our presentation. If you were here in person with us, you'd get one of these great buttons that says Ask Me, I'm a Census Champion. But I bet if you tweet at PhillyCAM and Philadelphia Gov, they'll give you one anyway. So, all right, thank you so much. That concludes. Thank you.